Welcome to our first installment of Pillars of Creation, the foundation of Genesis 1 through 11. I have joining me here today Mike Eisenberg, and my name is Jordan Zeck. I'm a minister with the DFW Church. Welcome to our discussion here today, Mike. I'm excited to dive into Genesis.
I'm excited to be here with you too, Jordan. Good to be here. And in case you don't know who I am, I, with my wife, have been in the ministry in the past for 25 years. I'm now working in the medical field as a PA. My wife's a nurse. And we've been in part of the Dallas church for the last 20-something years.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited to jump into Genesis here. But before we get into the actual scriptures, what do we need to think? Where does our mind need to be? How can we prepare ourselves?
Okay, so let me remind everybody here that we could talk about some of these things so much more and so much depth, and we're actually going to be doing some other discussions you can pick up on the website. But looking at an introduction to this study of Genesis, first thing I want to encourage you to is open your mind, open your heart to new things, and ask God to help you see what is true, what His will is, and what He wants you to see for your life. Genesis is a special book. We're all probably familiar with what it is, what it means. Well, Genesis comes from the Greek word meaning origins or beginning. The Hebrews, and Genesis was originally written in Hebrew, is the title is simply the first words of the book in the beginning.
Yeah.
So, and we're going to be looking at Genesis, and the reason we're looking at Genesis 1 through 11 is because Genesis has a structure of two sections. There's the primeval section of 1 through 11, and then 12 on speaks of the history of Abraham, his family, and ultimately Israel, and the idea that Israel is going to bring blessing to the whole world.
Yeah. Very cool. And like Mike alluded to, we will have more content that we couldn't fit into this 35-minute video on our church website. So keep an eye out for that. And neither of us are, Hebrew scholars of Old Testament. You have some background in New Testament theology. But this is something that we've been very passionate about and studying and reading books on. So, we're just trying to bring and open our minds, like you said, to what does Genesis show us, and maybe some things that we thought we knew growing up, but maybe we're going to look at some things that might challenge that, and that's okay.
Right. And some of it comes with time because there are good, positive, new knowledge brought onto the scene about civilizations surrounding the nation of Israel and before the nation of Israel come about, seeing the difference between Eastern and Western thinking that we want to be sure we understand, because we want to see that the book of Genesis is in a context, and we want to understand what's gone around before it, around it, from those around them, and the Hebrew people themselves.
Yeah. So we are starting in the beginning. This is laying a little bit of foundation for the rest of Genesis, and really the rest of Hebrew scriptures and even the New Testament as well.
Absolutely.
And we'll be looking at things like generations and Abraham. I don't know if there's something you want to elaborate quickly on that, but maybe we can talk more about what Eastern and Western thought is, like you mentioned. How does that affect
I think that's important. First of all, this is laying the foundation. And in fact, Genesis chapter 1 is, by God's choice, the first chapter of this 66 book canon.
Yeah.
And it's not just one chapter of many, it is the first chapter.
Yeah.
It is a foundational thought. But it was given to a Hebrew mind, it was given to a Hebrew society that was in Eastern thinking rather than Western thinking. Now, again, this is another discussion you and I can have, and you might pick up on the website, but the Eastern thinking and Western thinking is different. We come from Greek mindset. We trace the way we see the world and the way we determine what's true and right and the way we define life that goes back to the Greeks. And even closer to that, to rational, evidential thinking, rational thinking that comes from the time of enlightenment. And the idea of science and scientific theory that's where we come from in our mindset, where the Eastern mindset is different. It looks at things, for instance, words are not about definitions, but they're about pictures. Numbers are not just about quantity, but they're about symbols and quality. God is not just about does he exist, but what's he like? Who is he, and what's my relationship? How would you describe my relationship? And truth, and this is especially important. We say, what's true? What's right? Well, truth for us is a rational thought. For an Eastern mindset, it's what's the experience? You experience to gain truth. So we want to understand when we read Genesis 1, it's coming from an Eastern mindset.
Yes. And that's not easy for us to do, but we're going to try our best to do that as well.
Right.
So why don't we jump into part of the passage here in Genesis. And so we'll start there at chapter 1, verse 1 of Genesis, where it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters."
Okay, if I had to grab one thing here, Jordan, the question would be, what do we see about God? Because as it's important, whenever you have all these questions about the Bible and creation, that you remember the first words of this verse, in the beginning, God. What do we see about God here?
Well, we see that he creates.
He's a creator.
Yeah.
What else?
We see that he's got a spirit, the Spirit of God.
God is spiritual. He's not a physical being like we are.
Yeah. And well, I guess if we jump down to verse 3, God starts speaking,
Right.
speaks light into the existence.
Right. God didn't create by doing anything. God spoke.
Yeah.
The power of the word. So God is creator, God is spirit, God is the word, speaks. Which I would encourage you to look at John chapter 1 and see what that says about in the beginning.
Yeah.
But from the beginning, we see this character of God. And this is important. We see that Genesis is written in the time to people that the Hebrews were sending a message to the people around them.
Yeah.
Your gods are like this. This is our God.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's like we as believers follow Jesus. We say to the world, you believe the world is like this. This is our God. And I know you're familiar, Jordan, with some other ideas about these civilizations around the Hebrews and their creation stories. This is not the original creation story. Matter of fact, this is one of the newer creation stories.
Yeah, I think, growing up, I always thought of the Bible kind of in this vacuum, but it wasn't. It was Genesis was written amongst other cultures. We're talking ancient Mesopotamia with the Sumerians, the Babylonians. We're very all familiar with Egypt and their role in the Hebrews' lives, but you had Akkadians and Canaanites, and you had the Neo-Babylonians. And so they're a group of people that they were influenced around.
And what were their creation stories like?
They were very violent. They had a pantheon of gods, but there was similarities between them, where you have a primordial waters of chaos. You had kind of god monsters that were representative of these formlessness and darkness, and they needed to be controlled. But instead of, like we read in Genesis here, where it's spoken, it was through violence. It was through destroying these gods. And so in one of the Babylonian creation myths, you have Marduk stepping up as the hero of the newer gods to defeat Tiamat, one of these creation monsters, who's a serpent. And we'll dive more into interesting things like that, serpents. But he shoots her with an arrow straight clean through and throws up one part of her body to be the vault of the sky and the lower part of her body to be the earth. And so you see these similarities, but it was very violent. It was not very loving. Even when we think about humans being created, they were more slaves to the gods. They were to serve the gods.
So their story was not about the gods who loved them.
No, not at all. They were made to do the work so the gods didn't have to do the work.
They were slaves. So, in fact, their creation stories reflected what the life they were stuck in: violence, immorality, debauchery.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the Hebrew story says, well, let us tell you about our God.
Yeah.
And our God is different. So I think it'd be good for us to read this. And here's why I want to read this, not just to get the information, but I want us to listen, because this is a Hebrew creation poem.
Okay. Yeah.
All right?
Let's do it. So we'll start at the beginning again. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
All right. So, first of all, if this is poetry, you're going to hear, and that's why I hope that you'll not only read this, but you'll listen to it. You're going to hear a sense of rhythm and cadence, and there's also numbers in here that are mentioned a lot. But what are some of the refrains that you hear as you go through this story?
Yeah, you hear evening and morning, a day, right?
Right.
You hear that it was good. You hear God saying things and bringing it into creation.
Yeah.
So those are three things that pop out.
It's obviously you've got sections, and we know that the Bible, the original writers didn't write things the way the NIV publishes, but the NIV that I'm looking at publishes it in sections like it's poetry, and you see God says, and you see evening, you see repeating refrains that you would see in poetry.
Yeah.
And what's this, when you compare this to the creation stories we were talking about, what sense do you get?
Well, you get a sense of it's not violent.
No.
There's no destruction of some primordial beast or God. God is literally just speaking, and things are being made. It's pretty simple.
Yep.
There's no fight for a hierarchy like in Marduk. He becomes the god of the gods, whereas this is just God.
He's there.
He's creating everything. There's no fight for supremacy.
Even though we're gonna get and we're gonna see as we read on, and this is one of those things you go, what? There are other spiritual beings there, but God is the God of gods.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. And so what we see here is a story that's a totally different tone. And this is where we came from. This is our God. And this is how we look at creation. This is the foundational story. And we want to keep going back to that story and the tone of this creation. What I want us to point out here, and this is another thought, is that the creation begins with nothing. Now, it doesn't mean there's no material existence, but there's nothing going on. There's chaos. There's disorder. There's no good things happening.
Yeah.
And then the story ends with the work is done. God is doing nothing.
Yeah.
So that's really the bookends of this story. Nothing to nothing.
Yeah.
In fact, when you read, you see the concept that this story, and that's one of the first big things I want us to get out of the creation story, is all about going from chaos to order. That's what this story God is bringing to us, that he brought things of chaos and he brought to order. Now, this is where it starts challenging our Western mind. And honestly, it can start challenging a lot of the debates we get into about Genesis 1:1. Let me say this, and this is coming to really become a deep conviction on my part. I believe this is what God's trying to communicate. He is not giving us a scientific treatise. He's not giving us a lab report.
Yeah.
He's not giving us a step-by-step, here's how creation came about from a scientific point of view.
This isn't a science book.
It's not. It never, because you know what? The Hebrews didn't have science like we do.
Yeah.
They didn't have the scientific approach. They didn't have theory and a hypothesis and working out rational thinking. They thought differently. So God comes to them as in the way that they thought. And what we see here, and if you look at it carefully, this is not about the creation of the material of the universe. This is not about the creation of material and process. That's what science does for us. It investigates the material and the process of the world we live in.
Yeah. So what is the story trying to show us here?
And instead, what God is showing is he brought function and purpose to the world. Now, if you'd ask a Hebrew, well, where did the material come from? They said, oh, God. Yahweh.
It's assumed already.
There's no question about it. But this story is about God bringing from this chaos function and purpose.
So how do we see that in the passage? Like, what sticks out to us?
So at the beginning, we see that the world is non-functional. It's like we said, there's nothing there as far as function.
Yeah.
And what God does is he goes through, and this is a really fast look through days 1 through 6. In days 1 through 3, he looks at 3 different spheres of the world, and he brings function to them.
Yeah.
He brings light. Then he brings birds and fish. Then he brings the animals on the land.
Yeah.
So he gives a place for function, a place for order, and then in 4 through 6 he puts functionaries. He puts things in there to carry out the function in those areas.
You see that separation. He creates space. Well, he creates light from dark. The space. He creates the sky, and then he creates ground. Yeah. So he's putting function. He's giving a space for something.
Right.
Where there was none before.
Right. So as you read through the creation story, you see space being given with separation, and you said it better than I did. He creates space for function, and then he creates the functionaries, or he puts the functionaries in there to carry out that. And the crown of it all, is the function of man.
Yeah.
And the function of mankind.
So you have space, and then he's filling it with goodness, good things like animals and plants and humans.
Exactly. So, and then secondly, not only is it bringing chaos to order, but we're seeing the nature of things when we look at this story. Yeah. We're seeing, number one, the nature of God. Mm-hmm. You know, what was God like? He was a creator.
Yeah.
He brought order. He fills things. He brings abundance to space. He brings beauty. He brings blessings. That's the nature of God. That's the kind of God we serve.
Yeah.
It's not Marduk.
Yeah.
Or those guys. It's Yahweh.
Yahweh.
The God of Israel. And this is the God who loves. And then if that's the nature of God, then what's the nature of the world? The nature of the world that we live in is not, this is a mess, this is a horrible place to be, which we might feel that way. Mm-hmm. But how does God see the world? God says, here's my intention. The world, I want it to be orderly. I want it to be fruitful. I want it to be sustaining. What does he say at the end? It's good, it's good, it's good, it's
very good.
It's very good. That's not how the ancients saw their world. But God says to the Hebrews, and the Hebrews are saying to their neighbors, no, our world is very good. And that's why I think we got to think about this. This is the God we believe in. We live in this world that doesn't feel this way. That God wants to remind us, that's not the way I intended it to be.
Yeah. Well, I can relate to like chaos in my life. Like there's points in my life where I felt like my life is chaotic or the world around me is very chaotic. And for them, like chaos would have been like famines and droughts and, you know, a bunch of weather patterns. And what did they understand is that God brought order to that. It's got a function and a purpose. And for me, I think of like, well, if I've got chaos in my life, like how is God trying to bring order to my life?
Exactly.
Or order to the world that can be in chaos since the fall of man. And so I can relate to that. And I'm sure most people kind of like chaos comes into our lives sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that's huge. That's huge.
Absolutely. And this is the foundational chapter where God's saying, this is the way I intended it to be. Mm-hmm. Now it gets messed up right away.
Yeah.
But God's saying, I'm going to get back there.
Yeah.
And he's going to get it back there one by one, family by family. But ultimately, he's going to get it all back there someday.
Yeah. So you mentioned mankind as being the crux of the created things. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah. Look at verse 26. And there we've seen the nature of God. We see the nature of creation. We see in this story the nature of mankind. What is man all about? We're not slaves. We're not around just to make our God happy.
Yeah.
God didn't create to be served by us, but he created to serve us.
Which is what other cultures would have believed.
Exactly. So when we look at verses 26 through 31, and it should be up on your screen as you're looking at this, look what he says about not only man, and notice it's mankind here. Mm-hmm. We have, when it says man, it's Adam.
Adam, yes.
Which is
a play off of Adamah, which is dirt.
But
it means mankind.
Yeah.
Adam means mankind.
And it speaks of men and women. This is male and female here.
Yes.
Now we're going to get the male and female distinction in the second telling of the creation in chapter 2. Yeah. But here we see this is all of mankind. And what we see here as we look over these verses is, first of all, how God blessed man. God created, and he created us to bless us. He created us to bless us with life, to meet our needs. He talks about, here's your food.
Yeah.
Incidentally, he goes on to say, and here's the food for the animals. He even made the animals happy by giving them food too.
Yeah.
And there's some vegetarians might look at this and go, this shows we need to be vegetarians. That's an argument for another day. But he did give us abundance. And he wants us to be happy. And he wants us to enjoy and be blessed by the life we have. Life is not meant to be a drudgery, but it's to be a blessing from God.
And there's purpose too that we're given.
And that's the second thing. It's a blessing. He didn't give us work to do. He gave us a purpose to live. And there's a difference in that. He didn't create us to be slaves. He created us to be fellow workers. Now think about that. Think about that here. He created the world for us to rule with him
Yeah.
as mankind. Now, who's really going to rule the world?
Well, God rules the world.
Yeah, God's going to rule the
Overall,
world.
yeah.
And we're like that wannabe standing next to God going, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Yeah, this is me and God are doing this. But we are. And we're being blessed to be with God. And that's why he says, you manage it. You control it.
Yeah.
You bring, and then we turn around and do what? We do the same thing with our world that he did with us.
Yeah.
That we work and function in our world to bring abundance and happiness to other people.
Yeah.
And that's a blessing we're given. And he defines it by saying, I'm going to create man in our image.
Yeah.
Okay?
Which makes us start to want, we got a lot of thoughts going on what that really means.
Yeah,
I think from a Western mindset, there's a lot of things.
So what do you mean? What do you mean?
So
by
what
that?
do we think of, like, does that mean like because we're conscious, or that we're rational, or that we're creative? Like, is it this innate part that we have as spirit? So we start trying to break down what that actually means.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I've in the past have typically thought. This is the image of God. These characteristics. I'm beginning to see this differently. Now, we have these characteristics, that's true, but there's some intellectual problems with saying that's the image of God. I believe, first of all, it comes back to the word image. The Hebrew word for image is the same word for idol.
Which, yeah, exactly. We should raise some eyebrows.
Yes, but God says, I'm going to create them and make them idols of me. Why is God so much against idolatry in the Old Testament? Because we're cheating ourselves.
Yeah.
He goes, I made you to be the idols. You're to be my image, not some piece of wood.
Yeah, it's the idols worshiping another idol, right? An idol creating an idol, which doesn't make sense.
But what he's saying there is not that we're a statue, but he created us as a human being to be his representative in the world.
Yeah.
So if we're his representative, we go out and we be like him for the world. That's our purpose. And so I think some people have put in their writings that we became little imagers. We're, as human beings, we're imagers of God.
Yeah.
And we go out and we represent God to the world by doing what he did with us and with creation.
Yeah.
And that we reflect Yahweh. Now, there's another discussion here. We can get into another discussion about when he says, let us. Is that talking about the Trinity? I don't think so.
Yeah, there's so many tangents we could go off of, and we'll put those in other videos. We got to stay on track.
We got to stay on track. But just remember, he's talking to someone there.
Yeah.
So, but he's saying, go for it.
Yeah.
Have a great time.
Yeah, and I love that because it's not just serve me, but I'm giving you purpose and fellowship with you, and multiply and bring order to things and blessings, and have a good time doing it.
Right.
It's not that it's supposed to be drudgery, and so we see a very positive image of man, a positive relationship with God.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of keep going on in the passage here. So we need to talk a little bit about, and we'll just touch on this, symbolism in the numbers, which you referenced before.
Yeah, and this is a long discussion, a lot because it involves a lot of the verses here, but I'll just leave this thought with you, is this. There's a lot of symbolism in this first chapter. There's a lot of threes. It begins with Genesis 1:1, the three characteristics of God. But there's a lot of threes that go through here.
Which 3 is the first complete number.
Exactly.
You can make a triangle, right? You can't really make anything complete with 2.
I didn't know there'd be math, but I'm glad that you brought
That's
that
the
in
extent
there.
I'll bring into this.
We're bringing geometry to it. There's also the number 7. There's a lot of 7s in here.
Yeah.
And then if you add 7 to 3, what do you get?
You get 10.
There's a lot of 10s.
I'm glad I got that.
And you got that right, yeah. So let's just say that Genesis chapter 1 is full of symbolism of numbers.
Yeah.
And what you see there is not only, you see the design of the literature, that is, this is being prepared. This is not a science treatise, step 1, step 2, step 3, but this is literature that's communicating something about the quality and character of creation.
We have to treat numbers differently
Yes.
in the text.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing, and this is very, very important, and we're coming near the end, but this is one of the most important things I want people to get out of Genesis chapter 1, looking at the literary form that it's in. And that's the word chiasm. You've heard of the word chiasm, right?
Chiasm changed the way I've read my Bible.
What did that come to mean to you?
Well, it brought more form to it. And so looking at it as a literary form, it's more about the discovery, the experience, right, in Scripture.
Right.
And so you're trying to find what is the Scripture pointing to, what is it trying to say?
Yep.
And so maybe you can explain chiasms a little bit.
So Western thought says, we're going to give you the points. We're going to discover it for you. It's discovered in point 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Eastern thought is, let's not disguise it, but let's hide the treasure in this literary form. We want you to search for it. Mm-hmm. Which also brings to this point. If you come across an unusual or difficult verse, the Western mind goes, I can't figure that out. That's frustrating. We'll ignore it.
Yeah.
Or either I'm going to come up with some bizarre explanation or I'm going to ignore it. Eastern mind goes, this is where the treasure is because I get to search here.
Yeah.
Because the writer knew it was bizarre.
They think about this.
It's kind of like the let us.
Yeah.
It makes you stop and think. But the chiasm tool is this, that in this device, there is the treasure built. And it's how the verses and how the words are organized.
Yeah. So how is that organized in Genesis?
So there's a couple ways. There's a couple ways we see chiasms. And we see both here in Genesis chapter 1. There's the idea of you've got two parts of the chapter, and they're organized like this. And I'm sorry if I'm taking you back to your literary classes, literature classes, English lit. But they're organized like this. It could be like A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A.
Yeah.
And the center is where the treasure is.
Yeah.
Or another way the chiasm would be A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D.
Yeah. So those letters represent like lines of Scripture.
Lines or ideas, or
ideas.
we call verses, but it's not tied to the verses. And with Genesis 1, you have both. You have one laid on top of the other. First of all, you have A, B, C, C, B, A. And what it is you have a small section, a medium section, and a large section.
Yeah.
And then you have a large section, medium section, and small section.
Yeah.
Those are the 6 days. All right? So that's the first chiasm. The second one is ABC, ABC. And this is day 1 through 4. You've got, you got day 1 through 3. 1, 2, 3. Am I getting my numbers right? Yeah. You've got 1, 2, 3, and then you have 4, 5, 6 that are parallel with 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
It's the function and the functionaries.
So day 1 and day 4.
Yes.
There's a relation between those things. Which,
and that'd be like what?
Yeah. So you have light and darkness, and then you have the created sun, moon, stars, the celestial beings.
Yes.
Right.
The space for function and the functionary.
Yes. And then 2, you have sky, but then you have the birds of the air in day 5, and then 3, you have ground, and you have. Sorry, it was the sky and the water. So you have birds of the air and the fish of the sea. Then you have the ground, and then you have land animals and humans there in day 6. So there's a relation between those days.
Right.
And so what are we trying to get to in the middle there?
So the middle, and with the Hebrews, they actually, and we don't see it in English because we got translation. What you would have sections, and you'd find the middle section.
Yeah.
And even then, you would find the middle word. So if you look at this whole story of creation as 2 chiasms, the middle section ends up being on day 4.
Yeah.
And
which is, what do we get there?
Well, it's where God creates the seasons, the special days. And the middle word is the day, special day, or the day for Sabbath.
So everything is pointing to rest. And
that's why, how does the creation story end?
With rest. We didn't read that.
Let's read
chapter
that.
2, but let's read that.
Let's read that.
So we have, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Which that word rest is funny because God clearly wasn't tired. I mean,
Man, I'm worn out. 6 days of
I
creation.
mean, speaking, right? He's just speaking, and it's very effortless. So why does he need to rest?
So the word rest here is a different kind of word for rest. It means he stopped because things were done. And God settled in. We're going to look at this with Eden. Not only did he stop, but he settled into Eden because that's where he was going to be now. But the idea is here, this is a poem about Sabbath rest. Now, we're not talking about the Sabbath day exactly in the way that Israel celebrated, although we see why they did. But it's about the idea of God saying, this is done. This is complete. This is everything it needs to be. Creation doesn't need to be anymore. I've made it exactly like it needs to be.
Yeah.
And this is my intention. And I am going to settle in here. I blessed you. We're going to work together. And you're going to bless the people you're around. And this is the world I intended it to be. Because he wants us to enjoy it. And you notice what's not here on the seventh day?
What's that?
There's no evening and morning.
So it didn't end.
It didn't end.
Interesting.
It was never God's intention for the seventh day to end. His intention was the seventh day is eternal. And that's why the Hebrew writer says there remains a Sabbath rest.
Wow.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Bringing us back to Eden. So, I mean, that's the conclusion I really want us to draw from this. When we look at the creation story, this is what God intended his world and life to be. And he wants us to be happy. And there are times where I look at life and I go, number one, this is not what God intended to be. And number two, the world he created, it's all I need.
Thanks, Mike. Well, there's so much more we could talk about, which we will in subsequent videos.
Yep.
But thanks for joining us today. If you're joining us on Zoom, we're going to have some time for Q&As, and we are looking forward to joining you guys next month for our next installment of Pillars of Creation.